Hi, my friend. In this episode, we are talking about binge eating and more specifically, why does it feel so hard to break the pattern? Why can't you just think your way out of it? So, if you're ready to learn about the link between trauma, your nervous system, and binge eating with a special guest, then let's get into it. Welcome to the Live Unrestricted podcast, a show where you'll learn how to heal your relationship with food and your body so that you can focus your time and energy on more important things like your personal growth. I'm your host, Sabrina Magna, food freedom coach, and my mission is to help make your life happier and healthier without stress, overwhelm, or guilt about food. If you love the show, please do go out and share it. And if you're looking for support with your relationship with food, details about my programs are in the show notes. Thanks for spending time with me today. Now let's jump in. All right. Welcome back to the podcast. And I really want to celebrate you for pressing play because that tells me that you take your healing, your relationship with food seriously, and you are willing to commit time out of your day to listen to something that's going to make your life better. And oh my goodness, are you going to love and learn so much out of this conversation? I haven't had a guest in a while, so I'm really excited to be joined by Stephanie Mara Fox today. She's a somatic nutritional counselor and mentor with a master's degree in somatic psychotherapy and the host of the Satiated podcast. And just like we do here, she helps women all over the world heal from disordered eating patterns, binge eating, emotional eating, chronic dieting, and body image concerns. And I'm not going to give too much away, but we're going to dive deep into what is hiding underneath binge eating. Why does it feel so hard to stop? And also, why does shame actually fuel this cycle? You know, that rush of negative thoughts and the decision to be better tomorrow and to start over and trying to beat ourselves into being quote unquote better. That's actually getting you further and further away from recovery and healing. And we're going to get into why that is. So grab a notepad, a piece of paper, a pen, your notes app on your phone, because you're going to want to take some notes. So without further ado, let's get into this conversation about binge eating and trauma with Stephanie Mara Fox. All right, beautiful. So Stephanie, today we're talking about binge eating. I think there's a lot that gets wrong when it comes to binge eating, especially this idea of, I know what I should be doing, and it feels like your body, your mind is fighting against you, like it has a mind of its own. And so I would love for you to start by just talking about what are some of the common mistakes when it comes to trying to overcome binge eating.
Yeah, absolutely. And you even just started to name it a little bit, in that so many individuals see the binging as the problem. And that's the thing that needs to be fixed and changed. And in my work, I more say, and it's on a lot of my websites and things, that your food coping mechanisms are not the problem, they're the answer. And oftentimes they're the answer to a lack of safety. They're an answer to a trauma response. They're an answer to our attachment style. They're an answer to our dysregulated nervous system. And so when we start to actually see that our body isn't the enemy, like you were just describing, so many people see the body as the enemy. And why do you keep sending me these food urges? And when we start to shift the perspective of your body is on your team and it's doing exactly what it's meant to do when it doesn't feel safe. The binge eating, for example, or whatever food coping mechanism you're navigating, it starts to take on a different lens. That actually it is your body's best attempt at trying to regulate you and keep you safe and support you. And it isn't actually the thing to be quote unquote fixed. Because especially if it is, like, let's say, an analogy sometimes I like to give is if you see that your behaviors with food, like binge eating, are like a baby blanket. And if you took a baby's favorite blankie stuffed animal toy away from them and did not replace it with anything else, oh my gosh, how dysregulated and uncomfortable, and how much that baby is going to scream and cry like that baby is going to be. And so it's kind of the same thing, that if we keep focusing on getting rid of the food behavior, that your body may feel so overwhelmed and so unsafe that you just took away the only strategy that it has found for regulation, that it's going to tell you to go right back to it. And so what I often feel like we need to focus on first is building capacity to embody, to reconnect with our bodies. And that's both in safety and lack of safety. I find, and I fell into this too, that there's so much focus on building safety, which is still the groundwork of the trademark work that I do called Somatic Eating. But at the same time, we also have to build capacity to be with when we don't feel safe, when we feel uncomfortable, and to be able to be with that too, so we don't feel like we need to run away, numb out, stuff down what we are experiencing in our body with food. Once we start to shift the focus away from it being the problem to be fixed, that's where we kind of get like, there's all those images of like the iceberg. We stop focusing on the tip of the iceberg, which is the patterns happening with food, and we get kind of underneath it to, okay, what is this food doing for you rather than to you? And start to see that like there's a lot of body communication that is occurring. And I like to just see that your food behaviors have become your body's way of talking to you, just as a somatic practitioner. And let's start to understand the language that your body has learned to talk to you with, so that we can also expand its maybe vocabulary to speak to you in other ways that are not just with food.
Oh, it's so good. And when you were talking about bringing that safety in, but also being okay with that lack of safety is so important, because I was just talking to my clients and I was telling them how over the weekend, I just had like a high anxiety weekend. And I used to struggle with binge eating and emotional eating. And in the past, when I had those high anxiety times, it was immediately, I have to get out of my body. I have to escape this. I don't want to feel this. And this weekend, it was just so beautiful to notice that I was sitting with it and I was just like, this doesn't feel good. Like feeling anxious, feeling stressed, feeling overwhelmed, none of that feels good. And I can welcome it. I can be with it. I can also know that is going to pass and this is temporary.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is such an ongoing practice. And oftentimes what I have found in my work is that somatics is the missing piece for so many people. One piece, for example, is if you are navigating a trauma response and living more in what's called your sympathetic nervous system, which is your fight or flight response. So what happens here is your blood moves away from your digestive tract towards your limbs to fight or flee. So like, let's say, for example, one of the tenets of intuitive eating is to trust your hunger and fullness cues. You aren't really going to be receiving those or even be able to hear those and be able to trust that
and rely on those. Yeah.
You are right. You're not getting that feedback from your body. Or let's say one of them is, challenge the food police. Okay, sounds like a great idea. Also, when you are in a trauma response, your prefrontal cortex, where you do rational, logical reasoning, is shut down. It actually diminishes even in size sometimes, depending upon the severity. When you are navigating this trauma response in your body, this is also where it's really hard to challenge your thoughts rationally when you aren't in the part of your brain where you can rationalize. Plus the fact that there's a part of the prefrontal cortex that's where intuition happens. So you can imagine that if you're navigating a trauma response and the part of your brain where you do intuition is shut down, like it's going to be really hard to intuit what to eat, how much to eat, when to eat. And so sometimes there needs to be more structure to the way that you're eating, or there needs to be more work on building what's called your interoceptive awareness. So that's learning the felt sense of your body, which can also diminish from trauma as well. And there's just some steps that sometimes need to occur first before something like being able to intuitively eat can occur.
I completely agree. And I remember when I first read the intuitive eating book, it really resonated with me because I felt like for the first time, someone was speaking to my experience. And when I started working in the context of intuitive eating, and then I started learning about the nervous system, I was like, how, like you can't do one without looking at that piece, which is the way that when you are in that nervous system response, fight, free, flees, you cannot think your way into making different decisions. You don't feel as connected in your body. And so opening my eyes to the role of your nervous system made such a big difference in the way that I approach things and the way that I understand that when someone has unprocessed trauma, as you mentioned, which is a lot more people than we think, and we carry that into our adulthood, into our eating, into our body image, which I definitely want to come back to, it interferes with our ability to be connected, to feel safe in our bodies. So can you talk on that a little bit about how binge eating can be a response to past trauma, and even for anyone who's not familiar with how trauma manifests in your body, in your mind, in your nervous system? Can we get into that?
Yeah, absolutely. So there is so much confusion because trauma has become this popularized word. And no, not everything is trauma. I feel like because it has become so popularized, everyone is like, well, have I experienced trauma? Was that traumatic? Could that be traumatic? And so if we kind of break down that first, trauma is not about the event, it is how the body processes the event. And so if we actually look at, okay, what are the events that are processed as traumatic? That would be an event that happens too much, too fast, or too little for too long, and there was no co-regulation in place to support your body in feeling safe to be here. So the example that I often like to give is, for example, let's say you're a little kid, you're playing on the jungle gym, and you fall off and you skin your knee. Okay, you're there, you're bleeding. Your mom or dad is like right there, and they run over and they're like, okay, I see you fell. Let's look at this boo-boo. I think you're going to be okay. They kiss your knee. Right away, you get co-regulation. You're like, I fell, but everything's going to be okay. My parent is here with me, or my caregiver, and they're cleaning me up, and I'm back out on the jungle gym again, and I'm totally fine. That event wasn't necessarily processed as traumatic. Now, let's say a kid that falls off the jungle gym, they walked there by themselves. No one's been watching them. They fall off the jungle gym, they skin their knee, they're bleeding, they don't know if they're okay. No one's coming to check in on them. That could be processed as traumatic, as also too little for too long, that potentially they don't have parents ever checking in on them. And so they're not getting the attunement and attention that they need. And too much too fast. That event happened really quickly. They didn't know how to regulate. They weren't getting co-regulation. And so that could be processed as traumatic. So again, it's not about the event. It is how the body processes what is happening. So, if we bring this into, just for a second, relationship with food, and I'll come back around to kind of what happens in a trauma response. But if we bring this for a second into relationship with food, is that first, food comes in as a resource and an ally for co-regulation. So if we're not getting that co-regulation from a caregiver or a parent, food really can come in as a substitute of, like, it's reliable, it's consistent. So many people judge themselves for eating what we now call hyper palatable foods. And
Big quotation marks there.
Right. Big quotations there. And so, it's like, okay, if we look at the food itself, it always tastes the same. It's consistent It can always be there for you. You can rely on it. It kind of mimics a lot of the time what we needed from a parent, that consistency and knowing that we can rely on it and trust it, and it's always going to show up for us and we can lean on it. And so when we're not getting that as children, food can kind of come in as a really great substitute parent for ourselves, just to kind of cultivate a little bit of that compassion.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing is that when you go through these events, that what they turn on in your body is a fight, flight, freeze, or just to go with the F theme, I call it flop state, but it's kind of known as immobilized or collapsed. But when we enter into these states, what can happen is that, our heart rate can go up if we're in a sympathetic state, our breath gets shallow, our blood starts, like I talked about before, moving away from our digestive tract. We kind of feel in a somatic way, our body will start to hold tension and tightness for protection and armor. The world starts becoming a scary, scary place that doesn't feel safe to be in. Mm-hmm. And so the body will start to take on certain postures, certain ways of tensing itself to say, okay, we're going to armor ourselves from the world now, and then we'll be okay. What can happen, though, is that food comes in this response. One, because all of the changes that are happening in our brain, in our body, they increase cravings. Because when you think about it, your body is perceiving that it is running away from a tiger 24/7. And it needs lots and lots of energy to make sure that it can continue to run away from this tiger. And so you naturally will crave things like higher carbohydrate, foods that are richer in sugar. Not that we have to demonize these foods. I'm a big practitioner of practicing food neutrality. We are not going to label foods as good or bad here, but it's like, what are these foods doing for your body? They are supporting you in getting quick glucose so that you feel like you can continue to have the energy to fight or flee from perceived danger. And so that's one piece of like, let's stop judging the craving, because if you're continuing to focus on the craving as something you have to try to get control of, you're missing out on what is my body trying to tell me through giving me this craving.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one piece. And then the other piece is that food can help us create a distance from our body that now doesn't feel safe to be in. So if I'm eating tons and tons and tons of food, which, just to empathize and connect with those who are listening here, I navigated patterns of binge eating for about a decade and have not had a binge urge in almost 2 decades. And so I really, truly believe in full recovery. And I truly believe that this can change. I've experienced it myself, but it wasn't focusing on trying to get control of the binging. It was working through the trauma response in my own body so that I could feel safer to re-inhabit my body, to connect with my body, to navigate what was showing up in my body, emotions and sensations, that then the need for food just got to naturally dissipate all on its own because it wasn't needed anymore. I didn't need it to run away from myself. I didn't need it to numb out what was going on in my body because I felt a greater capacity to be with my body. So that is the other piece, that what binging is trying to do is it's trying to create distance. But for some people, because this is so nuanced and everyone's an individual, and I do like to kind of name that I might suggest something and it might be, well, that's not my personal lived experience of binge eating. But it can also, for some people, if you feel like you aren't allowed to speak up for your needs, you aren't allowed to set boundaries, you always feel like you're putting everyone else before yourself, that binge eating can also be a way to get a momentary solitude experience of putting yourself first. And so that's why also, if we just focus on getting rid of the binging, but you have nothing else in place to feel like your life matters, that your voice matters, that you matter, then the binging's just going to come right back, because it's doing something for you. And if it's
Mhm.
giving you this one moment where you can slow down and actually experience yourself and your body and feel cared for, where you have choice, I get to choose what I eat and how much I eat, when you feel like maybe you have no choice in any other area of your life, like that is doing a lot for you. And that's where it's like we need to focus on some of these other things of how the trauma response is maybe fueling sometimes the binge eating, for the binge eating to then kind of dissipate and not be needed anymore.
Yeah. Oh, this is all so good because what I'm really hearing, and I hope that all of you listeners can take away, is that what often happens when you struggle with binge eating is you're so consumed by shame. You're so consumed by the I'll start over tomorrow. I'll be better tomorrow. You're just like trying to beat yourself into submission or recovery that we never pause to ask ourselves, what is this doing for me? Like, this has a function. There's a reason. I always talk about this, that everything that we do, the things that we like and the things that we don't like, they have a function, or else we wouldn't be doing them. They're not this like problem that just is completely negative. And all of those things, even when we have a conscious goal and we're like, I want to achieve this, this is going to make my life better, I always recognize when there's a resistance there. And I have to tap in and ask myself, okay, there's something here. There's something within me that doesn't want to achieve this goal. In the same way, so many women want to overcome binge eating. They want it out of their lives. But when we really tap in, we can ask ourselves, but there's a reason why this is still here. There's something that it's doing for me. And when we can pause, put that shame aside and ask ourselves those questions, we're going to have so much clarity on what is the root cause of this and how do I address this so then the binge eating, like you said, can dissipate.
Yeah, exactly. I completely agree with you. And that shame piece is such a big part of what can also perpetuate sometimes the binge restrict cycle. And even talk to the part of you that feels like they need to shame you. And I know that that might sound like a little bit odd, but what does shaming yourself do for a part of you? And that does bring in like a little bit of parts work,
Yeah, I
but
can hear that
you
internal
know,
family systems.
right. But it's also like, okay, if we see that even every reaction that happens for us, that it's something that was taught to us, it was something that was set as an example. Usually we learn to parent ourselves the way we were parented.
Mhm.
And so even the voice of shame might feel familiar of a person from your past. It might feel even more comfortable, like the embodied experience of shame might be something that actually is what you know, and whatever it is that we know gets associated with safety simply because it's not unknown.
Mhm.
And so there might be some comfortability with the experience of shame. And I know that can sound like so sad to be like, oh my gosh, like I'm more comfortable with the experience of shame than joy or the experience of self appreciation. And right now it could be yes.
Mhm.
And so we get to bring in just a lot of compassion in this, that it's like, okay, this is just what your body has become accustomed to. And that's why we have to kind of ride that edge of building safety, but not too safe. So it's like, it's gonna feel uncomfortable to start to step into something else in your body, to start to talk to yourself differently, to start to appreciate yourself, to start to step into curiosity and compassion with yourself. That's gonna actually initially feel really, really uncomfortable because
Mhm.
it's just not what your body knows. And so it's like, is this okay? Like the imagery that always comes to mind for me is there's like a rustling bush and you don't know if there's a bunny rabbit behind that bush or a tiger. And so your body's like, I don't know what to expect here. You're like meeting me with compassion and like, I don't know if I should trust this. And like, is this
Mhm.
okay? Is this like, are we going to be in danger if I keep going on this path? And so
Mhm.
we get to just do this really, really slowly. And I get that like your mind wants this to be done with. Like, I totally agree with you that those who are struggling with binge eating, and I went through that too, of like, you just want it over with. You have tried probably every single strategy that is out there to try to diminish your binging and are so confused as to like, why does this continue?
Mhm.
And so, as we're pointing out, like, there are reasons that it does, but also that, like, there is some safety in the known of the binging, that it's going to take some time of, we have to go at the body's pace rather than the mind that's like, just get over it, just set boundaries, just be over it, just like, just say no.
Mhm.
And to your brain, it works so quickly with all of those neural pathways. And it's like wanting to go on automatic pilot mode as much as it possibly can, but our body moves at a much slower pace. And
Mhm.
so I find that there needs to be sometimes a lot of patience in this process, that like this is going to take time, but your nervous system can be rewired and your brain is plastic. So I always like to give just like so much hope here that things can change. It just takes a lot longer than maybe your brain is setting a timeline for, because it does take time for the body's nervous system to rewire itself that it is safe to feel safe.
Mm, yes, I think a perfect example is I also used to be a binge eater, and my control mechanisms translated into my work. And I grew up with an overworking dad. And so I just experienced when I started my business, just like going, burnout, and then having to take a break, and then going, burnout. And then eventually I got to my last burnout where I made the decision. I was like, I am rewiring this out of my nervous system because it is killing me. And I remember going into a really, really stressful launch. And my intention was, whenever you feel that urge to work past 5 p.m. or to work on the weekend, just sit with that discomfort. Don't give in to that urge, and just go really little by little, and know that it's not going to feel comfortable. Like, don't expect this to feel natural because you're going against your natural instincts. And it was so interesting because if you had asked me like 2 years ago, I never would have thought that I would be able to feel safe not working 24/7. And that first week of just sitting and breathing through it and recognizing that, okay, my nervous system is like acting out and I feel that urge to open my laptop. And now I really did like wire that out of my nervous system. And so whether it's overworking or doom scrolling on your phone or binge watching TV and binge eating, like all of those things are things that you can rewire out of your nervous system.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And, that's another great example of how, if we also don't take the time to kind of address what is continuing to push me in this direction internally, it can show up in a lot of other areas of our life.
Yeah.
I find a lot of those that I work with that, if we see that food is just the doorway, that oftentimes we are engaging in the same kind of felt sense familiarity of behaviors, because it's all being fueled from maybe that dysregulated state in our career, in our
Mhm.
relationships, in our friendships. It can show up in so many other areas, that I find that even if you just choose one area of your life that feels like, even I like to call it like wiggle room in your nervous system, where if food feels like way too much right now to feel like the thing to focus on, maybe you've been focusing on it for actually a really long time. Sometimes we need to actually take a little bit of space from the thing that's maybe feeling too overwhelmed to shift, and start focusing on, is there another area of my life where I notice there is a little bit of discomfort, but it feels manageable to be with? And that might be in your physical movement. That might be in your friendships, or maybe you're not kind of getting yourself out there in the world and taking yourself out on adventures as much as you'd like to, or experiencing novelty or awe, like all really important things to experience as human beings.
Mm-hmm.
That it's like, okay, you know what? That feels uncomfortable to imagine taking myself to like that class that I've been really, really wanting to go to. But it feels like a manageable amount of discomfort that I could like invite a friend and I could go do this thing. That any area that you decide to start to shift things for yourself is going to start to affect other areas of your life. So
Mm-hmm.
you don't always have to start with the food piece. Sometimes I find that because the binge eating is so glaring and so in your face, it feels like I have to attend to this first
Mm-hmm.
before I attend to anything else. And sometimes that can be perpetuating the trauma response,
Mm-hmm.
where it's too much too fast, where you're trying to engage in eating in a very different way that just feels like too much on your body right now.
Mm-hmm.
And so we can't approach the healing the same way that the trauma happened. We have to approach the healing in a way that is slow and in a way that feels manageable and tolerable, and we can take those baby steps forward. And so that might actually be in a different area of your life right now. And then you might feel like there's more space to come back to the food.
What a good point. Because what was coming through for me is if you imagine someone who the struggles with food and maybe body image has isolated you so much that you don't really experience connection, you don't have these deep friendships or relationships in your life. And then you're trying to tackle the binge eating, but that's all you have. You don't have that connection outside of it. Then it's going to be extremely difficult to get out of that and to create a sense of safety and regulation. So looking at, okay, well, how can I create more connection in my life? And it sounds so like it wouldn't be related, but it is, because when you recognize, okay, now I have a support system, now I'm not alone, now I have a sense of connection, then that is going to seep into the nervous system response that you feel around food.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know you said earlier you wanted to come back around to also
Mm-hmm.
the body image piece, in that I just want to bring this in of what we're talking about of building more co-regulation and safety in your life. And let's also just normalize and name that we also live in a world that is inherently unsafe. There's a lot that can, unexpected things can happen at any point, at any time. And that based off of also maybe the body that you live in and your body shape and what supports you in feeling like you're thriving. And this is just the way that your body is whatever shape or size. It says, hey, I'm good. I have energy and I'm sleeping well and I have mental clarity and I have clear bowel movements and all these other ways beyond weight that our body gives us feedback that it is operating well. That sometimes we have to break safety down to a second by second experience, because there are some people's bodies that may never feel safe to be here
Mm-hmm.
because of the fat phobic, weight stigmatized society that we live in. And we have so much continued ongoing work to do here to dismantle thin privilege. And that it is an important piece that I feel like is also one of the, factors that continues to play a part of someone's binge eating, is that it is actually weight stigma that is more detrimental to our health than literally any food we could possibly eat.
Yeah.
And so, that is just an important piece to name for some individuals listening, is that, when we're talking about safety, like, yeah, in some people's bodies, it is hard to feel safe to be here as you are.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point, because we don't always give the full attention to how traumatic it can be to live in a larger body in the society that we're in on a daily basis. So I love the fact that you mentioned, how can you feel safe in the body that you do have in all of those little moment to moment wins. So good. As we wrap this up, I would love to kind of make this concrete for everyone who's listening here, who can relate to what you're saying, who can really feel seen and understood when it comes to this whole internal battle of, I want to overcome binge eating so bad, but there's this force that's kind of pulling you back. I know this is going to be a huge question and a hard one to answer because everyone is so different. But how can you start? How can you start to bring awareness maybe to what function it's doing for you, how it's serving you? Like, where would you start them?
Yeah. So, first off, if we see that most food coping mechanisms are a response to disconnection and dissociation, that it's either helping us continue to stay disconnected or it's a momentary experience of safe connection, that we have to start to address safely coming back into contact with the body so that you can start to build that capacity, like you were talking about, to like be with an urge or be with an impulse or to get curious about what your body may be trying to tell you. We have to first embody to even start to be curious about what our body's trying to tell us. But oftentimes, usually what we hear is like, okay, you need to sit with your emotions, or you need to, even I talked about like growing your capacity to sit with discomfort. But we actually don't want to start there, because if all you've ever known of getting in touch and contact with your body is discomfort, then why would you want to connect with your body? And so where I like to start is having little check-ins with yourself throughout the day with a totally neutral body part. This could be a finger. This could be the tip of your nose, an earlobe, a kneecap, your elbows, like something where you don't have a lot of associations, you don't have a lot of story around. And usually there's not like a ton of sensation there unless you bring your attention to it. So let's say you pay attention to like your finger. If I even like kind of like hold one of my fingers right now, like, okay, it's like a little bit cold. It's soft. My fingernail is like really kind of smooth when I start to feel it. And when I notice like, okay, that is an experience of embodiment. I just embodied my finger. I described its texture, its temperature, the sensations that I feel there. Like if I really pay attention, I could probably feel like a little bit of like, my blood, like my heartbeat in my finger. And so like, I would never know that unless I paid attention to my finger. And so that was an experience of embodiment. And then you can kind of notice, how does it feel to pay attention to a totally neutral part of my body? And I noticed that actually like my body got a little bit calmer. Things started to slow down a little bit internally. Like that kind of permeated throughout the rest of my body when I actually gave my brain a focus to focus on a totally neutral part of my body. So sometimes we need to actually guide our attention towards a body part that actually feels okay to inhabit at first, rather than the tightness, the tension, the heartbeat, the shallow breathing, like all the things that can kind of occur when we're in that sympathetic state, like I was talking about before, that we want to very slowly touch in on those things. But I would say if you can kind of do this like morning, afternoon, and night, if that's too much, what I would often suggest is midday. Usually it's really easy for people to check in at the beginning of the day, especially if you got like a good night's rest, you're feeling more energized, there's a lot more mental clarity first thing in the morning. It might feel easier to check in. If you want to start there, totally start there. If that feels like the most manageable time of your day to check in with yourself, cool. What I often find is that, especially for so many people that struggle with binge eating, is that this usually happens later in the afternoon and the evenings. And by the time that you hit that point in the day, there is so much that your body has been trying to get your attention about, has been processing, has been reacting to, and that it may feel too much to then check in at the end of the day when it's like, now it feels like a dam that's going to just burst. And so binging kind of helps maybe turn the volume down sometimes. So even if you can check in the middle of the day, just to name like neutral part of your body, connect with that. If it feels okay to start to name how you feel, you might just name it as if it was just a fact. I've been stressed today. Of course I have. I had a lot of meetings. I'm feeling a lot of anxiety. Yeah, that makes total sense. Let me validate that. I had an upsetting conversation this morning. And just being in the like kind of notice and name, like what is happening for me, let me name it and let me validate it. That and just I like to really suggest of meet it with, of course. Of course I feel this way. Of course I'm having this reaction because it turns down that shame like we were talking about, and it kind of brings up the compassion that it's
Yeah.
like, yeah, these reactions make so much sense.
And even just by turning down that shame, you're helping your nervous system because when you're in that shame, you're putting more stress on yourself. So it's harder to think clearly. So good and so simple, so easy to do. So tuning in with yourself, because it's true that if your only experience of being embodied is uncomfortable and negative, you're not going to want to do that. And so doing that with a neutral body part, I think I'm even going to do that. I was looking when you were doing it, I was touching my finger and I was like, my finger is also so cold. So I love that. I think that's awesome. And Stephanie, thank you so much. Any last words that you'd like to leave with our listeners?
Yeah, I think there's a piece also around trusting the process. Sometimes it can feel so frustrating, especially when, and I get it. Like I was in this cycle for years and years and years as well, that you just want it to be over. And there can be a lot of frustration and a lot of confusion. And so even starting to meet yourself with like, I trust my body is trying to protect me. And I trust that I will move towards what I need to move towards in my own timing. And this piece of just like starting to step back into that also along with trust that you have choice, because what happens when our food behaviors are a response to past trauma is that trauma takes away our experience of choice. And so also building in that, where can you find choice? And if it doesn't feel like you have choice with food, find another area where you feel like you do. Like you have choice to say no. You have choice to tell a friend, I can't hang out today. You have choice to say, you know what, I actually can't lend an extra hand for someone else today. Or you have choice to ask someone for a glass of water or to hold the door for you. It's all these tiny little places where it's like, where can I start to experience that I have choice in my life and I can trust myself to speak up for those choices for myself. And I find that those two pieces are also really important part of this path in decreasing the reliance on food for choice, and also build that trust that like when you are struggling with food, that trusting your body that it's not the enemy and that it is actually trying to be on your team. It's telling you to eat certain foods in certain amounts and certain quantities because it's trying to make sure that you survive. And so even to start to say, body, I trust you. I know that can feel really, really hard to do, and that trust may not be there right now. And it's like, even if you need to name, like, body, I don't trust you yet, but I'm going to work towards that, that validation piece. But, just kind of naming some of these things can be really, really helpful. Of where can I look out for choice and how can I move towards trusting my body? What would support me on that journey? And, I'm certainly here for anyone who's listening. So if you're ever looking for more support, you can certainly reach out to me.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's so good because I've started to notice kind of a trend of coaches kind of sharing client stories of like, this client stopped binging in 2 weeks. And it really like, I see that and it makes me sad because it sets these unrealistic expectations of something that you've been struggling with for years or even decades. It's normal that it takes some time to rebuild that ability to be in your body. It's normal. And it might take, this is something that my coach tells me, it might take longer than you think. And that's okay. Just any win, any progress, even if it's unrelated to food, look at that as a sign that you are moving forward. So that's so good.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. Yeah. And it does set unrealistic expectations. So I'm so glad that you named that. And that sometimes also the coaches that are experiencing those, they're not also talking about how much work that person probably did before they came to that coach.
Mm-hmm.
And that they were just ready for maybe the change to happen by the time they got to that coach. And so that things moved maybe a little bit quicker. Like I've certainly experienced that with some of the people I've worked with, that by the time they got to me, they've laid such solid groundwork of
Yeah.
all the other things that they had been exploring, that there was just maybe some somatic nudges that needed
Mm-hmm.
to occur, that things did start to move quickly. But when you hear those kind of stories, it's not sharing the context of how long or how much additional work that person was probably doing to make that happen.
That's so good. I couldn't agree more. Stephanie, where can people find you and connect with you? I'm sure people are going to want to connect with you.
Yeah, well, first, thank you so much for having me on today. I just love this conversation with you. I can really tell we're like on the same page with a lot of things and practice in a similar way. So it's always great to kind of connect with people in this approach. So individuals can find me first. My website is stephaniemera.com. So you can learn about my work, Somatic Eating, and you can find me on Instagram @_Stephanie Mera. I'm on basically every social media platform. Either it's Stephanie Mera or Stephanie Mera Fox. So, if you like Facebook, you can find me at Stephanie Mera Fox, TikTok, Stephanie Mera Fox, and all the links are also on my website. I also have a podcast called Satiated. So I go into a lot of similar topics and continue to kind of take on more of a somatic lens there. And you can also join my newsletter. So, I put out a lot of content there as well. And when you join, you'll get kind of a 5-day email series that kind of walks you through some somatic practices you can start to incorporate in, slowing down and connecting with your body. And yeah, the other piece is that I have a second website called somaticeating.com. And so you'll find information about my 3-month live course there. So I teach this class twice a year. It's 3 months. I teach it live, so you'll get lots of interaction with me. I'm finding we need so much more community these days. So I really want to connect with people as much as I can. So if you're curious to kind of do this work in a group setting for 3 months, you could go check out somaticeating.com and check that out there.
Beautiful. I'm going to put all those links in the show notes because if my listeners are anything like me, that attention span will not retain all of it. So it'll be all in the show notes. But I so appreciate you coming here and sharing your perspective. I'm sure that so many of these listeners are going to feel seen and validated, hopefully turn that shame dial a little bit lower. So thank you so much for taking the time. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. If you found it valuable, I would love if you would share it with someone you know that could benefit. If you're loving the show, don't forget to subscribe over on Apple Podcasts so you don't miss a single episode. I really love hearing feedback from you, so please leave a rating and review over on Apple to help us get in the ears of more people who need it the most. Finally, come hang out with me on Instagram @SabrinaMagnaHealth for more educational content and get up close and personal with me. Thank you so much for being here, and I'll see you on the next episode.